Grabbing my waist. Try to kiss me.
Touch me with her hand.
Would touch my breast.
Grab my leg.
Grab my arm.
Grab me like real roughly.
Grab, touching, rubbing up. No, this is not okay.
And I tell him to stop and he keep doing it.
The only thing I could do was push him off.
Tell him to stop.
I told him stop.
I went outside and cried.
And if you tell him to stop, he'll be like, oh, you know you want it.
They know how to corner you in.
Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Those stories of fast food workers gathered by the Fight for 15 organisation are no different to millions around the world who deal with sexual harassment in their workplaces. The toll it takes can be devastating, and more often than not, it goes unreported. But recent high-profile allegations, a damning investigation from university campuses in the UK, a series of reports coming out of Silicon Valley have revived the conversation. Here's Malika Bilal with more.
We're following the allegations of sexism against Uber, the popular ride-sharing app. Now, workers at the company have come out with a series of complaints, beginning with former Uber engineer Susan Falder-Rigetti, whose story went viral. In a blog post, Fowler said she was propositioned by her manager. She described institutional sexism at the company and lamented Uber's low number of women employees. Now, Fowler's post encouraged more women within the company to come forward with their own stories of sexism. And Uber is seeing the backlash. Now, recently, 2 higher-ups left when the company was tipped off about potential sexual misconduct. The story has Delete Uber trending. Well, that hashtag has been popping up quite frequently these days. Every time there's a scandal at the company, Twitter users show the world they've removed the app from their phones. Paru tweets, workplace harassment is a crime and inaction is abetting. 2 themes we'll discuss on today's program.
Thanks, Malika. So sexual harassment in the workplace is an issue that affects everybody, regardless of their gender or sexual preference. Joining us today to talk about this, we have Emily Martin. She's General Counsel and Vice President for Workplace Justice at the National Women's Law Center. Oriana Castro Ramirez is a former copywriter who faced sexual harassment in her former job in Bogota, Colombia. Bisi Alimi is an LGBTQ activist and director of the Bisi Alimi Foundation. Rashima Quatra is the Communications Officer at Outright International. That's a non-governmental organisation that addresses human rights violations in the LGBTQ community. And Umberto Carollo is the Managing Director at White Ribbon Canada. He's a gender-based violence prevention specialist, and his organisation is a movement of men and boys working to end violence against women and girls. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. Ariana, there's a story that caught our eye. The reason you're on our show is because we saw your story, and it was a story about a victim of sexual harassment in a Colombian advertising agency. That victim is you. Did you ever think that you might fall prey to a sexual harasser?
Well, back at that time, I didn't fully understood the dimensions of sexual harassment. So I never thought I would be a victim of it. Never.
I mean, I hate to take you back to that time, but take us through a typical day and what might happen to you that you now know you were being harassed.
Okay. So I started as an intern in this ad agency. It is one of the biggest ones in the world. The first day I got there, everyone warned me about, don't worry, everyone's going to try to be with you, to kiss you, or to do something with you. It's okay, it's natural. So go with it, it's okay. So I was like,
What was your reaction when you were told that? And often when you're first there, you're told, where the bathrooms are, where the kitchen is, but you were told someone's going to kiss you, that just go with it. What were you thinking at that moment?
Well, I was shocked because I didn't expect that. I was just expecting like, hey, this is the big agency you always wanted to work, because this is the agency I always wanted to work. It was shocking. So I became very overprotected of the situations I got in the agency. I mean, in the meantime, I was an intern. Every time we go out together, I would say, I don't drink. I prefer not to drink, and let's just leave it like that. And a lot of the guys insisted, some of the guys insisted in coming with me to my home just to leave me, just to keep me company, because at that time we didn't have like Uber or apps for calling taxis. So every time we got there or we shared a ride, this guy would try to touch my leg, or when I was getting out of the car, they would tell me, "Let me go up with you." And so I was very confused. I never understood the dimensions until I got out 3 years ago from all the agency world. And I got into therapy because I had nervous bulimia and a depression. So
Umberto,
I had to go.
What would you say to men who were at the agency where Oriana was working if you were going to say, do you know what? I think we could behave better. How would you even approach that situation?
Absolutely. First of all, as a man, it really pains me to hear experiences like Oriana's. It's very sad, and it's unfortunately it's so reflective of the kinds of workplace environments that we find throughout the world, including in Canada and US and North America. What I would say to men is that we have an important role to play, both in ensuring that our own behaviors and our language and the way that we interact with women and our co-workers in the workplace is respectful, and it values all the talents and contributions that people bring to the workplace.
Is a place
and
where,
second of all,
Umberto, is a place where an intern is told expect to be kissed, go with it, is that place beyond help?
Absolutely not. I think places like that need to hear from the leadership, from those in the position of power and authority, from supervisors, from the president of the company, that kind of behavior is not acceptable, and that women and all employees deserve a workplace environment that's respectful, that's inclusive, that's welcoming, that's safe, and that's free from those kinds of behaviors. So we call on leaders within workplaces to make this an important issue and to speak clearly and loudly about it, and to help create a culture and environment where these kinds of behaviors
Umberto,
go,
I'm so glad that you mentioned hearing from leadership and how important it is, because I want to share a story where someone, you could say that this was a positive. I'm going to pass this over to you, Emily, and you tell me what you think. This is Erin Crane. This is her experience working at a theme park. She says her coworkers held a draft on all of the girls to see how far they could get with them. When they asked male supervisors for time off, they were told to perform a sex act on them. So what happened when that happened? Erin says it was incredibly common. When her male boss laughed about it, it made them feel invalidated, so she told a female boss. That person took action and made them feel validated, but the action was taken against the boss who laughed. It wasn't taken against the perpetrators. So is this a win? How common is this?
Well, that's better than nothing, but really what leadership that makes a difference should do is, first of all, work to create a culture, as Umberto said, of respect and civility within the workplace, make clear that women are not sexual objects at work, but also hold people accountable for living that culture up and down the organization. So lower level supervisors, middle managers have to know that that's part of what they're being evaluated on, that they are preventing and responding to harassment promptly. And obviously in a situation like that, which sounds really over the top, there needs to be prompt discipline of people who are trying to force young girls who are probably in their first job to provide sexual favors.
I agree completely. And the first feeling I got is that the environment, because there's a lot of creative people and young people, the feeling was to be just young. I mean, everyone was relaxed, but there were never limits. And I felt that they allowed their employees to create the culture inside, which it shouldn't happen, because I think it should come from the leadership. And in my perspective, it didn't came from me. I never got it. So I agree completely. It has to come directly from their leadership, because I went to human resources and I told them, after being grabbed in a party by one of the creative directors, after feeling harassed in the way one of my colleagues looked at me every time I got up to the bathroom, or when I turned around and he was looking at my Facebook pictures, I denounced that. I told my human resources department and they didn't do anything. I had to ask them to change me to another group, and they never did an investigation, or they never changed the guy. They even promoted him afterwards.
You know, people
So
are
I felt it normal.
Let me just
People
bring in Bissy, Emily, and then you and Bissy can have that conversation. Bissy, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest problems about harassment is a sense of entitlement that most especially men at workplace feel. And this also comes from the fact that you look at the hierarchy in a workplace, it's predominantly male. And they have this sense of we own this space. And any woman coming into this space has to be subjected to our rules and to the way that we do things. And hence, they will bring to the workplace their male bravado because they always know that they will get away with it. And in your case, and in the case of many women, there's always that getting away with it, that slap on the wrist. And the idea that we have to go to the HR, we have to go to the manager, when at the top of the organizations are men at the same time. And we should not forget, men always got men's back. And that is one of the things we need to face. And that is why someone like me,
So basically, give us some evidence of that, or from your experience or your knowledge, men always have men's back. For example.
No, okay, for example, and I'm going to make this really, really broad. We saw in the last presidential election in the United States when the current president was accused by many women of groping them. And the conversation basically was, oh, this is what boys do. Oh, this is a locker room talk. And that has always been the way men talk about this thing.
I want to tell you, in my human resources department and the president of my agency, they are all women. They're all women. There's no men there.
So what's going on?
So
what's going on there
if
it's women allowing a culture of harassment to happen?
Well, that certainly isn't impossible. I think that one of the things that this story reveals, that the other story reveals, is really anybody who doesn't have a lot of power in a workplace is particularly vulnerable to sexual harassment. So if you're young, or if you're low skill and low paid, if you don't have a lot of bargaining power, you are vulnerable to various sorts of exploitation at work, including sexual harassment. And sadly, the fact that women are in charge is not any sort of guarantee that a workplace can't be exploitive.
I'd like to.
But it could be a guarantee that the women will be.
Finish your sentence, and then I hear Rashima. Bissy?
I said it should be a guarantee that women will be protected, because we also have to understand that most of the perpetrator of, or the upholder of this patriarchy attitude are women themselves who feel that this is okay. Yes. And we've gone through it, you have to go through it, it's part of the culture of the workplace. And women have got to stand up and denounce these things and not support it.
Rashima, what were you going to say?
Sure. I was going to say, when we think about protections, we really have to think about policy protections at the, at the local level, at the company level, and at the federal level. And when we think about LGBTIQ individuals, there are basically no anti-discrimination protections for workplace that protect against discrimination against sexual orientation and gender identity. That means most individuals, even if they have faced some kind of sexual harassment, have nowhere to go in their companies, because if they come out as being gay, if they face some kind of harassment, they can be let go of their occupation, which creates this kind of extremely oppressive environment with no external, there's nowhere for individuals to go. So when you think about the hierarchy and when you think about policies, if the company is not letting you know that you're going to be protected, how will you do it? And then when you look at the hierarchy of individuals who are in there, there are no LGBTIQ individuals who are at the top of the hierarchy who are your bosses. So if there's no one there to advocate for you, where really do you turn?
I like that you brought up that point, Rashima, because actually we heard from people online who say that's why some of the LGBTQ of our community members feel like they're the most vulnerable. I want to play you a video comment we got from actually 2 trans women who talk about some of the unique challenges that they face. Have a look.
My name is Pat Black. I'm a trans woman in Uganda. The reason as to why we trans men in Uganda are doing sex work is because we cannot be employed anywhere because of who we are.
When I was fired by my boss for being transgender, he justified his decision by saying my transition from male to female was inappropriate. As long as such ignorant and small-minded attitudes exist, workplace discrimination will occur, and trans people and other vulnerable employees will need protection in the courts and in the culture. We don't deserve to lose our livelihoods simply because some people can't accept that we exist.
Rashima, do you want to take that on?
Yeah, I'd just like to say there's very little data that's out there that shows us what the incidence rate is of sexual harassment or of discrimination against the LGBTIQ population. And when you try and disaggregate that by populations, we see even less information. But from the information we do know, we see that the incidence rates of harassment and discrimination against the LGBTIQ population is higher than the heterosexual cisgender counterparts. There's research out there that shows 15 to 43% of gay people have experienced some form of harassment in the workplace, and 90% of trans individuals have experienced some kind of harassment or discrimination in the workplace. And part of that could be because of societal, stigma, discrimination, and hypersexualization of LGBTIQ people. So oftentimes in the workplace, if you're lesbian, gay, trans, you're looked at as a sexual object, as, something to be fetishized. And that causes advancements and harassment that is unwelcome, that doesn't give agency to the individual. And then again, when you don't have protective policies and you're in fear of losing your job, where do you turn?
Bissy, this is something that you really have first-hand knowledge of, because your foundation did a study about LGBTQ workers in Nigeria. What did you find?
Yeah, it's exactly what she just said, and most importantly, because we're concentrating in the workplace, and one of the arguments that I make is that we live from the home, on the road, and at work, and if these two places are not safe, then it will end up to be very traumatizing. Most of the people that we actually survey in our study actually came out, and most especially women, were talking about being raped at home by their relatives, and then the experiences that the sexual harassment experiences that they face at work, because some people know about their sexuality, and men felt like they owe them that honor of making them real women, basically, by having sex with them, and by forcing themselves on them. And these women were saying they had no one to go to. We're talking about multi-layers of discrimination, because you don't have police to go to, you don't have anyone at work to report to, you don't have anyone at home to report to, and this becomes like such a huge burden on an individual, most especially, whether we like it or not, women. I know that men also experience harassment, but the highest proportionate of sexual harassment happens to women every day.
I'd like to, add on to that.
Rashima, go ahead.
And just say that, trans women or transgender individuals are very much outcasted from the formal workforce, and many of whom either choose to or are forced to do sex work. And they face harassment all the time by authority figures who are the ones meant to be protecting them from sexual advances or from other kind of discrimination. In places where LGBTIQ behavior or identities are criminalized, police officers will go to trans women on the streets who are sex workers and extort them for money and, have them forcibly produce or do sexual acts against them because it's criminalized. So when you can't even turn to people and authority figures who are meant to protect you, really, where can you go? And if you're forced out of it,
but also it's still very much about patriarchy, though, because trans men, I know a lot of people will disagree with me. Trans men don't experience as much sexual harassment like trans women do. So it's very much about the fact that men feel that they own the home, they own the workplace, and they own the street.
So basically, I'm intrigued at the example that you're giving, and while I think a lot of people might believe you, I do want to share this story because we're listening to you talk. Nafizi here on Twitter wrote this and interjecting: when treating the topic of sexual harassment, it should cut across all genders because it's not exclusive to females only, which we see you've mentioned. But one person in particular actually shared their story with us via Reddit. He wanted to remain anonymous, but he says he he was groped by a female colleague in his workplace. He says, as a man, I feel that I experience the same thing a woman experiences. I didn't feel a threat to my personal safety, whereas women do, but he says it was uncomfortable. He brought it up with another executive who said, she's a pretty girl. You should have been flattered. Emily, I want to give that to you because, of course, we know this does cut across both genders.
It does cut across both genders. I think Nisi is right that women are more likely to experience sexual harassment, but certainly men experience sexual harassment too. And it's also worth noting that there's same-sex sexual harassment. So, for example, there's a United States Supreme Court case from a few years back which said that that is illegal too. Which involved a man who was working on an oil rig, and the other men who he worked with thought that he was too effeminate, and he experienced terrible sexual harassment and sexual threats as a result. And so there are a lot of different ways that harassment can look, which really, again, goes back to the point of the importance of workplace cultures that take this seriously and really don't make assumptions that only these sorts of people can be sexually harassed, that only these sorts of people can be harassers, but really communicate to all employees, here's what the expectations are, and here's how to make a complaint if you're experiencing harassment.
All right, there's so much more
Absolutely.
to talk about.
And on that...
Umberto, I'm going to take you to our second show. We have two shows about this because there's so many areas to discuss. So Umberto, Rashima, Bissy, Oriana and Emily will be in our next edition of the stream as we talk more about sexual harassment around the world. But before we get to that part two, I want to remind you of Ai-jen Poo. She was on the stream earlier this week, and she's the director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. We were talking about who might be the most vulnerable to sexual harassment, and she had a very intriguing answer for us. Have a listen to what she told us.
And so we often compare domestic work to the Wild West because you never quite know what you're going to get. You might find a wonderful employer who you stay with for a long time, or you have conditions of modern-day slavery and human trafficking, severe cases of sexual abuse and harassment, and then everything in between. There's no standards, no guidelines, just really almost an arbitrary or happenstance way that you find yourself in a set of conditions. And if you can imagine, with many of the workers being migrants, undocumented immigrants, women of color, people who are marginalized in terms of their social status, that increases the vulnerability.
Ai-jen's organisation and thousands of others marched to mark International Women's Day on March the 8th. Some of the issues they were marching about: sexual harassment. Here's Malika with more.
As Femi mentioned, the National Domestic Workers Alliance was one of the many groups around the world taking part in rallies and protests to demand gender equality. And people across the United States joined the Day Without a Woman strike to show how valuable women are to the U.S. economy. And globally, protesters raised awareness about some key women's issues in their countries. In Argentina, protesters fought for a variety of causes, from ending gender violence to better sexual education, which the teachers here are calling for. And in Ireland, protests focused on the repeal of a controversial abortion ban. Now, as part of a global conversation, fast food workers in the U.S. city of Chicago championed ending sexual harassment on the job. Well, there's a lot left in that conversation about sexual harassment in the workplace, but unfortunately we're out of time on today's program. Part 2 of our discussion, though, continues next time, so stay tuned. Remember, you can join in using hashtag AJStream. We'll see you online. Femi?
Thank you very much, Malika. I dug out, thank you to our HR department at Al Jazeera, our Al Jazeera sexual harassment policy. It is on this page and on this page, so 2 pages from our manual about employment and how we should behave at work. I also asked our HR department, have they ever invoked anything on the sexual harassment policy? I'm going to quote one of our HR team, and she said, absolutely. Do you have more stories to share with us? Hashtag AJStream. We will take those stories, your experiences, and what you do about sexual harassment wherever you happen to be in the world into our next edition of AJStream. So do stay with us until then, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.